Welcome GRD 121 Computer Graphics to Exercise 6. This will be Apple Pear Football, and I'm going to show you a sample here under Documents and Resources in my Warren, and it's handouts, so these are PDF files typically. And if you go down to Unit 5, I don't have instructions yet, but I have a sample here. And here's a sample, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see these things on one page. Here's the apple, and it has a nice gradient on it. It has a little more of a leaf that we're going to work with a little bit more. There's a stem on it, so it's a little bit different than the other apple that we did. So it'll take a little bit more time, but it's still pretty simple because we'll be working with anchor points. And same thing with the pear. We didn't do a pear last time, and if you did something in CSC 103, this is a little different. We'll add a little bit to it, but we're still going to add the stem. We're going to add a leaf. We're going to put a shadow on there. We're going to try to modify the gradient a little bit more. I know the gradients can be a little challenging in Gravit and Illustrator as well, and we're going to make a football. And we're going to do that in Gravit. We're going to make 3 pages. And what's really cool is I made a 4-page PDF, and I made it right from Gravit. So it basically took my 4 pages. I had a page for each item, and then I made a page, and I put all my items on one page, and I exported it as a PDF from Gravit, and here's my PDF. So that's pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with using Gravit so far. I was considering using Inkscape because we could download it and run it locally on your computer, and it has a little bit more flexibility in terms of using text effects and things like that. But I've been pretty happy with Gravit so far for a free program as far as what we can do. So that's the sample that we're going to work on. We're going to do something like that, and you can see we're going to put an inset path. We're going to do some rounded rectangles. So it'll kind of bring together some things we've been doing for the past couple exercises. It's still simple. It's still a learning process. We're not doing a whole lot of creativity yet, but we're kind of building on what we know. So hopefully you'll be nice and confident and familiar with Gravit to start doing some other things after this. But I'm going to go to Gravit right now, and I'm going to make a new page, and I'll just do it a portrait letter size again. Now, we can always change that. You can always make it landscape or something over here, but I'll start off with that. I'll start off with a regular size paper. That way, if you make a PDF or you make something that you need to print out, you're already ready to go. So I'm going to save it right away, since in the last video I forgot to do that until I was already working on it. So I'm going to save it, and I'll just go over to the save icon, and I'll call this 6-apple-pear-fb for football. And there's my Gravit file. And we're going to work with multiple pages again, so we could work kind of independently, and then we could put them all together too. There's nothing that says you can't have things on one page and cut them and paste them to another page. We could do that, but when you're working, you might want to have things on individual pages. So I'm going to start with an apple, so I'll name my page Apple. So that'll be my first page that I'm working on, then I could keep things a little bit separate. So we're going to make an apple pretty much the same way we made one last time to start. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to start off with 2 ovals again, and I'll give you some specs here because it might make it a little bit easier so you're not kind of doing a lot of guesswork, but I'm going to make kind of like an egg shape again, and I'm going to make it around 3 by 4. So I'll make it like 3, and I'll hit tab, and I'll make it 4. Just something like that, some kind of egg shape like that. So I'll make that, and remember, it's an ellipse first, and then you have to make it a path. You could make it a path right away, so let's make it a path. And then I'm going to rotate it. You could go right here and just double click in here and rotate it 15 degrees. I did it like 25 or 30 last time. That was too much. We'll do like 15 degrees and just hit enter. And now we're rotating that shape. And then we're going to duplicate it, Command D, or you could just do edit duplicate, which is Command D on a Mac. It would be Control D on Windows. So I'll do that. So there's my copy, and then I'll flip it. And then I'll just move it over, and you can move it over manually and kind of overlap them. And they should overlap a little bit better. And you just want a little divot down here, a little bit of a wedge up here. And then you could still line them up by using the align middle, so they align kind of up and down, like on a directional here, they'll line up. You don't want to center them. You don't want to use align center because they'll go on top of each other. So you don't want to do that. I'll do Control Z, but you do want to align middle so they kind of align on their horizontal axis. All right, next thing we'll do, if this looks okay, it kind of looks like an apple shape, doesn't have to be perfect, we're going to do a union. So we'll do that just like the other exercise. We'll make a union, and it says compound shape, which remember, compound shape is composed of 2 paths. So right away, let's just use the squiggle, convert it to a path so we just have 1 path. And that's all we need here. And you could even call it apple if you want, because we're going to do a leaf and then we'll do a stem. But that way you could just call this apple, because this will be the body of the apple. We're not going to take any bites out of it or do anything else. Before we do anything with colors or anything like that, we'll get rid of this little wedge here. Even though it may be covered up by our leaf, what I'm going to do here is go into our sub-select tool, and I'll click on this anchor point. It says it's a straight point, which usually means there's no handles, but it is a corner point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use mirror and just kind of smooth it out. So it has a little dip in the middle. So I'm going to smooth that out. Now it's smoothed out one side, and if I just drag this up and kind of keep it even like that, and I'll zoom in a little bit, and that looks okay. Now the nice thing about mirrored is the handles will stay the same length. So if you bring it in a little, it'll come in on the other side. And then if you want to bring this up a little, you could even bring this up a little to make more of a dip like that. Bring these up. And even if you want to bring this thing in a little bit, kind of taper your apple a little bit so it doesn't look so round and peachy looking. You could bring these in a little bit and even kind of make these bow out a little bit. So it looks a little bit more apple, like a Red Delicious. They kind of go out a little bit. But you know how apples kind of go out a little bit. You could even bring this in a little if you want to taper it more at the bottom. So get used to using these things and use them very subtly. So I think that looks okay. You could always pull this out a little. You could pull this out. You could kind of tweak your apple as much as you want, depending on what kind of apple you like. But that's a good apple shape. It's better than we did the first time when we basically just combined them and that was it. I think that looks better. We have a little kind of smoothness here. So it's a nicer looking apple. We have more flexibility as far as what we want to do, bringing these things in and stuff like that. So anyway, we got to be careful. You don't want to make it too strawberry looking, but I think that looks pretty good once we get some color on. Here's a little anecdote for you. The Apple logo by Apple Computer, they put a bite in it because they wanted it to look like an apple because they said it looked like a cherry if they didn't have a bite in it. So that's kind of, we run into the same issue here when we're working on this, having it look like a cherry or some other kind of fruit. So anyway, it's not just us. So what we're going to do now is put a gradient on it. So now that we're done working with anchor points, at least for the time being, I'll go back to my pointer tool and I'll add a gradient. And I'll go here to radial gradient. And it's black and white by default. I'll go on the black end and make that red. And I can move this over here. We were doing that before. And what I think I'll do is I'm going to make this one orange, just to get some more warmer color in there. And then I'll move this over a little, and then I'll still put a highlight here. I'll click here, I'll put a highlight. Now it's black right now, and maybe I'll make it yellow. So there's kind of a yellow, instead of just the typical white highlight there. Now it goes from yellow to orange to red. It's a little more realistic. If this red is too bright over here, you could make it a little darker, a little more realistic looking like that. That looks a little more apple-ish. And one thing I think I did, if I look at my sample down here, I put green on the bottom. Now it looks like almost like a glow or shadow, but now you got to be careful with this, because if I go down here, now I'm going to move this over a little, and then I'm going to click right on here. I'm going to click there and I'm going to put green. Now when I first do it, it's not going to look good. It's going to look terrible. And I'll move this down and make it like a dark green, like that. And I'll move this away a little bit. Now what we're going to have to do, now this can be hard to do, but I'm going to try and rotate this whole thing. But before I do that, I'm going to make it bigger. So I'll zoom out just a little bit so I can see this thing, and I'll make this thing bigger, and I'll make this thing bigger. So that kind of goes to the edge. Then I'll even rotate it, like kind of rotate this so it kind of goes like that, because I want my thing kind of down on the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of move like almost like 3 o'clock, except I'm moving a little bit. So I'm doing that, and you can keep even doing it more. Move this down here and move this over here, because I kind of want the green like a little edge on the bottom. That's all I want. And actually that wasn't that hard to do. I know this can be confusing. If you move these too close, you'll get a real harsh line. If you move them further away, you'll get more green. Now maybe you want a little more green here. If you went brighter with the green, you get kind of a little more of a glow there. I'll go a little darker, and that doesn't look too bad. So again, what I did was grab the ends and just kind of keep this L shape, but just move it around a little bit. I know this is not the easiest thing to work with. If you grab on the whole thing, you can move it around like that. You know, if there's too much green, you could kind of move this in a little bit, and move it around like that. I guess you could move it in all different areas, but that looks okay. So, and again, it takes some trial and error, so I don't expect you to be perfect at it. But I'll leave it like that right now, and maybe I'll even move this down and move that down to keep the greenish down at the bottom, but it gives a little more color into it. And that's it. I'm fine with that. So I'll click off, I'll zoom in a little bit, maybe not that much, and I'm going to make a leaf. Now, last time we did a leaf with an intersection. This time what we'll do is we'll just make an ellipse. We'll just draw an oval like that. And I guess I'll fill it with green right away, just so I know it's a leaf. And instead of doing an intersection and all that work, what I'll do is, first of all, again, it's an ellipse. Let's convert it to a path so we could work with the anchor points. Now it's a path. I could even call it leaf. Let's call it leaf right away. And now what we could do is take our sub-select tool, and I'll click on this anchor point, and if I want to make that pointy, you remember this from the heart exercise, I could just click here and it'll suck in the handles. And if I go here, I could either suck in the handles by using that and have a shape like that, or I could use the disconnected and it'll put handles there, and then I could do whatever I want. I could kind of zoom in here. Let me zoom into my leaf. You know, you could pull these down like that and have a leaf like that, and, you know, move this up. You could do whatever you want. You could shorten these things. You know, you could really tweak your leaf here if you want. You can make it look a little different too. Like, it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. You can maybe move this over a little. Maybe this will go in as a little, you know, like S shape or something. I mean, whatever you want to try. You know, it's just a leaf. And then I'll put a gradient on it. I'll go down here to fill. And just something real subtle. I'll just do I guess I'll do a radial. And it's going dark on the outside, green in the middle. And you could always flip these. You can always go here and just be like, okay, I'm going to move the black over there and the green there. That's one way to do it if you have a hard time changing colors. And that way I could go here and just make a dark green. I'll click on green and make it kind of dark there. So now it's a kind of a darker green in the middle. And maybe I'll do a linear. And before I even mess with the linear, I should probably put my leaf where it's going to be so I know what the highlight looks like. So let me click off of here. I'll leave the gradient alone for now, but I like the linear. And I'm going to take my leaf and I'll go back to my regular pointer and I'll bring my leaf over here. And I'll use this thing to kind of flip it around. That looks kind of like a leaf. Doesn't have to be real big. You could stretch it or do anything you want with it. And that looks pretty good. And it's mirroring kind of the highlight that's on the apple because it's kind of dark on the edge. It's a highlight over here. So I'll leave it like that right now. And one cool thing you can do is just throw a drop shadow on. We know how to do that. Now, down here in the drop shadow, I always mention going like 10, 10, 10, 50 or 5, 5, 5, 50, something like that. I like to keep these even. So let me try something where I do 7, 7, 7, and I'll do 40. I'll make it even lighter because I don't want the leaf to look like it's really coming out. So let me try that. And that doesn't look bad. Even if you want to go less with this, you could even go 5, tab 5, tab 5, tab 30. You make it real subtle. It doesn't have to be a whole lot here. So there's my leaf. And now a stem. Now you might think, oh, that should be easy. I'll just draw a line. Try to make a stem out of a rectangle. I'm going to go here and make a rectangle. And I'll just make a long, thin rectangle like that. And I'm making it real big because it's easier to make it big first. So I'll make this big rectangle and I'll make it brown because it's kind of distracting with that gradient. And if you ever go here and you're like, where's brown? Just go to orange or dark red and then just kind of go down here. And if it doesn't change like it's happening with me, make sure you go and change it to color fill. And again, use red, use orange, anything. If you go down here, you'll get a brown color. And if you want to go a little warmer, that's okay. I'll go a little darker with that. Now you might say, well, that doesn't look like a stem. Put it there. Does that look like a stem? No, it doesn't look like a stem. But watch how easy this is. Now remember, it's rectangle. So what you're going to do is convert it to a path. And then you're going to use your sub-select tool. And watch this. This is kind of cool. You're not going to add any points. Just hover right in the middle of the line segment and just bend it. And then hover over here and just click and drag it and bend it. And look at how cool that is. It'll actually add handles for you when you start bending the path. And I'll zoom up here so you can see what I'm going to do up here. Then you could hover over this line and I'll just pull it up. So maybe you want a stem that kind of goes up like that. Maybe you want a stem that kind of goes down. You could just kind of drag it back and forth. But either way, now I have little anchor points here. So whatever you want to do. Maybe you want it like a little S shape, one going up, one going down. You can do that. You can make it narrow, or you could bring these things down, whatever you want to do. So just by taking a rectangle and just editing that path a little, we get a little stem shape. And if you're done editing these things, Be careful not to cross over them or anything like that, but that looks pretty good. And then when you're done, you could just scale it down. I'll go back to my regular pointer and just grab the corner and go into 45, or if you want to hold shift to keep it in perfect proportion. Although if you go into 45, it should stay in proportion for you. And now that looks pretty good. I'll hold my space bar to just kind of move it where I want. Now, it obviously should be behind everything. So if you click on it, it's on the top. Now, how do you know that's it? Well, I'm going to call it stem. And I could drag the stem below if I want, or you could use the send element backwards. You could move it backwards behind the leaf. You could do that. And it's showing a little bit behind the leaf. You could make the leaf a little bigger, a little smaller. You could change colors, anything you want. You could rotate the stem a little. And if the stem is sticking out, then make it go behind the apple. No one's going to know. Go over here, just drag below the apple. And now the stem's below the apple. So now you have an apple with a stem. I'll zoom out a little bit. That looks pretty good. You don't have a bite on it or anything, but when we put it next to a pear, that'll look okay. So that's our apple. Experimented a little bit with a gradient, a little bit of gradient on there, and we kind of modified our path. So we're not sticking to just ovals and intersections and things like that. Now we're tweaking it a little bit. So let's see, I just auto-save so I don't have to save. And that's pretty much it with my apple. So we're not going to do anything else now. We're going to move on to the pear and do that next. And matter of fact, we could probably steal the stem and the leaf. So I'm going to do that, and I'll do that in part 2, so I don't have to cram everything in this video. I'll stop here, and then we'll pick up with part 2, where we're going to do the pear.